Hey everyone, I'm Josh, and in this video I want to talk about why it seems like the youth tend to not really care about the mental health of the old. There are a lot of reasons for this, but in this video I want to basically cover three of the most important ones that I believe are contributing to this phenomena, because there are probably a bunch of different things, but to me these three are the most impactful, and they're things I've noticed in my own life since moving back in with my parents earlier this year and being around a lot of their older friends who are really great people. I've been able to kind of notice some of the things, some of the trends that may be contributing to this in general. So before I even hop in, please know that this video is not supposed to be some ageist video where I'm going to attack the old or allow the old to attack the youth. I don't want any of that. The whole purpose of this is just more to be informative for why I believe this phenomena is happening. So without further ado, these are the three reasons I believe are contributing the most to this phenomena. The first one is the fact that it seems like older folks tend to not really value mental health that much in the first place. That's due to cultural reasons. The second one is in line with the first one. The older folks tend to not really be that in tune with their emotions, also due to cultural reasons. And the third one is because the youth tend to be a bit self-absorbed. And I'll go more in depth in all of these shortly, starting off with that first one, how it seems like older folks tend to not really value mental health all that much. Like I said earlier, this is due to cultural reasons. When they were growing up, nobody really valued mental health. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some people who did, of course, people who were ahead of their time. But in general, society didn't really value mental health, right? It was all about sitting down, shutting up, and just putting in the work that you needed to do to survive, right? And even in school, mental health, again, wasn't very much focused on. It just wasn't something that was really at the forefront of society. It isn't even now, but like the youth have definitely brought it into the conversation far more than it has been in the past. And this is what I'm getting at. The fact that it wasn't really something anybody talked about before until like maybe a decade or two ago. It's relatively new that it's now something that people talk about in households even. That didn't really happen before. Sure, some people would, of course, but they were the outliers. It wasn't the norm. Now it's actually normalized. So that's the whole point here. Cultural conditioning made it so that the older generations don't really focus on mental health. In fact, I've seen this a lot online where older folks will kind of mock the youth for caring about mental health to the extent that they do. That's all you need for proof to know that it's just not something they really value. So of course, going off of that, it's going to make the youth not really care all that much about the mental health of the older folks because they're not talking about it. The older generations aren't sharing their mental health with the youth. So of course, if you're not discussing something, nobody's going to care about it because they're not thinking about it. It just goes without saying. So that's one of the biggest things that I believe is contributing to this whole phenomena. The fact that older folks aren't really discussing their mental health with the youth, so the youth don't really even think of it. It's not at the front of their minds because it's not being talked about. It kind of just gets swept under the rug. So that's one of the biggest factors at play here. And then going more in depth on number two, how it seems like older folks tend to not be super in tune with their emotions. Again, a lot of this has to do with that first point and how it's all this cultural conditioning where people just don't really care about their emotions because society's not talking about it, they're not normalizing it. Nobody really talks about it at work, which is, of course, where you're going to get most of your social interaction. So if nobody's discussing it there, it's probably not going to be something that you're really going to spend much time thinking about. So older generations weren't really raised in the most healthiest way when it comes to being in tune with their emotions and their mental health because it wasn't really discussed. So now that they're older in life and they kind of need more reliance on the youth to help them out and that kind of thing, it's a bit harder because there's this disconnect there. I'm not saying the youth are super in tune with their emotions, not all of them are, but they certainly think about that more and talk about it more than future generations, or not future, prior generations have. So I'm sure you can see what I mean by this. Just the fact that if you're discussing something more often, if it's in the cultural lexicon, of course people are going to be thinking about it, it'll be normalized, and that means that more people will work on whatever that thing is. But when people aren't discussing emotions or mental health, of course nobody's going to really focus on those things or even try to work on them. They're not going to prioritize them because it's just not something that the society has made important. And this is a big problem, of course, for prior generations. I'm really glad to see that now the youth are kind of prioritizing these things, even though, like I said earlier, it does lead to that cultural disconnect where older folks will be like, those things aren't important. Why are you spending time on them? And the youth will be like, well, they're super important. And yeah, You get my point here. So these cultural differences are a large factor in why there's this disconnect between the youth and the older folks when it comes to mental health and emotions. And now I'll go back to that third point, which was how the youth can be self-absorbed. I'm sure this is probably the first thing that a lot of older folks thought as soon as they saw the title of this video, because this is probably one of the most common things that older folks think about when it comes to these kinds of cultural differences with the youth not really understanding older folks. Usually older folks would think, well, it's because the youth are self-absorbed. And they're not exactly wrong there. There is a lot of self-absorption within the youth. But I wouldn't say that most of this is due to even selfishness, or at least it's not selfishness by choice. It's not so much that people only care about themselves. I have an argument here that if you're open-minded and willing to listen to, may open your eyes to one of the biggest reasons why the youth are kind of as self-absorbed as they seem. And it's because life is a lot more difficult for them now. Like, believe me, I'm living this myself. I just moved back in with my parents earlier this year. I'm 30 years old, so having to do that at 30, that's not exactly something you want in life, of course. And it's because of how difficult things are out there. They're incredibly difficult. I mean, now, thankfully, because of some things that have happened in recent weeks, people are becoming more aware of this huge wealth gap between middle class and that 1% who are hoarding a bunch of money. Well, that wealth redistribution that the 1% have been doing for like the past probably 3, if not even longer, decades has made life incredibly difficult for the youth. Now, home prices have skyrocketed because you have all these private investment firms being able to purchase homes and hold on to them as assets, which is horrible. That shouldn't be a thing, but here we are, it is. So that immediately makes it harder for the youth to purchase a house. And then car costs have been going up, gas, food, housing, everything. Rent has been skyrocketing. And while all these things have been going up, the entire cost of living has been increasing. Wages have stagnated. I mean, heck, when you look at it, the federal government in the US hasn't raised the minimum wage since 2009. That's crazy, right? And that immediately means that a lot of people out there are hurting if they're working minimum wage jobs. They need more than one just to be able to survive. So right now, the economy, even if it seems great, you have to realize that doesn't exactly mean that it's great for the youth. That means it's great for the 1% for sure, because they're always profiting off of all of this. And right now, like I said, they're hoarding a ton of wealth, which means it's out of the hands of the youth. I know a lot of people like to think of the economy as not being a zero-sum game, but in some regards, it actually can be. And as soon as you have people hoarding all the wealth, that does mean life will be harder for the people who are just beginning their journeys, which are the youth. So knowing that, it's difficult right now for the youth, which means they are self-absorbed because they're in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, it's incredibly difficult to empathize with other people because you're focused on being able to put food on the table for you for the entire week and being able to afford rent and all that kind of stuff. So it's very tough for people to focus outside of themselves when they're in that mode. And just with how well I'm able to follow trends and whatnot, I truly believe this is impacting a lot of young people out there. So knowing that, I would easily make the assumption that they're going to be self-absorbed because they're in that survival mode, which immediately means they're not really going to be empathizing with the older folks, especially because a lot of older folks didn't have these same problems while they were at the same age. So it makes it a bit difficult for them to empathize with each other because there's that disconnect again. Where, I mean, you even see this online all the time. I see older folks telling the youth to just work harder as if that will actually change anything. Kind of won't, right? Like if wages have stagnated, what does working harder really do for you? Well, meanwhile, the cost of living is skyrocketing and you're still bringing in the same paycheck every month, every year. It doesn't help you all that much, right? So these disconnects are what are causing this communication issue where, yeah, the youth doesn't really care all that much about the mental health of the old because they're too focused on just trying to survive. So these are some of the reasons I believe are contributing to this whole youth and older folks having that disconnect between the two of them and why it seems like the youth don't care about the mental health of the older folks. They often do. It's just they're in that survival mode. And because, older folks don't really talk about their mental health or their emotions, it makes it difficult to even breach that gap, or should I say bridge the gap, and even have those conversations. I mean, I can tell you from my own experience, I'm not going to get too in depth here because I don't want to put any family members on blast, But it took a while for me to even be able to talk about emotions with some of my older family members. It just wasn't really a thing until they realized that I wasn't going to judge them for it or anything like that. And I actually wanted them to open up to me emotionally. I wanted to know what they were like. I wanted to know what they thought about things, what they were feeling. And they didn't really know that until I expressed it, because it's not something their generation really focused on. So yeah, these are my assumptions. Of course, I could be completely wrong here, but these are some of the reasons I believe are greatly contributing to this whole disconnect between the youth and the older folks out there. So I hope, if anything, that this video has been a bit eye-opening, and I hope that it at least increases empathy between both of these groups of people, the youth and the old, because we need it now more than ever. We have to understand that we're on the same team here, and we're all human beings, right? We're all having our own journeys, and sometimes things can be incredibly difficult. And the last thing we need is for people to not be able to empathize with each other for all sorts of reasons. So yeah, I truly hope that if you get anything out of this video, it's just to view the other category from yourself and be able to empathize with them, to view them in a different light and be able to understand what they're going through, because everybody's kind of struggling right now. So yeah, I hope this video has been useful, and I'm gonna get off my soapbox and stop rambling here, but I truly hope you enjoyed it. And if you enjoy content like this, be sure to subscribe for more. Feel free to leave a like on it for the algorithm. That helps me out immensely. Definitely let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. I'm curious to see what you have to say. But again, please, no ageist thoughts here. This wasn't meant to attack the youth or attack the old. None of that crap here. We're all on the same team. But I truly hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Arrivederci!